Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I've been a member of a political party now for 53 years, and I'm going to say some things that perhaps are negative about the involvement of political parties when you get close to communities. But let me just visit a little bit of history. In 1831, the number of electors in Scotland for parliamentary elections was less than 3,000. Therefore, the connection with the wider community was all but nil. Incidentally, we tend to forget that in the 1832 Great Reform Act, that removed the right of female persons to vote in parliamentary elections, although it left them, subject to the property qualification, able to vote in council elections. So quite a lot of interesting things in the history. Now, we, of course, until the Pontefract by-election, which took place on the 15th of August 1872, we actually voted by going up to the front of the returning officer and saying what candidate we were going to vote for. And indeed, the results of the vote were published. So I have with me the Blowfield district, which happens to be near Norwich. It was the only one I could readily find, which shows that in 1871, the by-election, parliamentary by-election there, James Bond voted Tory, I can tell you, but his neighbour in the electoral roll, John Bailey, voted Whig, and it's all recorded here. And of course, in these circumstances, democracy worked in a substantially different way from the way it worked once the 1872 Ballots Act came into operation and was first run in 1872. Now, that's actually relatively recent history, because all my grandparents were already born by the time of the Pontefract by-election. So a lot has changed in recent times. And indeed, it's as well to remember what has happened in the 20th century as well. When Churchill lost his seat in 1922 in the general election, he at that point had been an MP for Dundee, Dundee elected 2 members in a single first-past-the-post ballot. It was actually first and second past. Even though you had only one vote, they elected 2 members. And when my mother first voted, she had 2 votes, because if you were a university graduate, you had a vote for a university MP, as well as for your own constituency member. And indeed, the university vote was by single transferable vote, which continued until the 1950 general election. So quite a lot changes and continues to change. But what kind of effect does it actually have on people's engagement? And the answer is, as far as I can make out, almost none. And I look at international comparisons, and the figures I was able to conveniently find, which cover a period from 1960 to 1995, arbitrary but probably useful. The top of the league is Malta, without compulsory voting, who in that period had a 94% turnout. Helpfully, the committee visited some Scandinavian countries in that same period. Denmark had 87%, Sweden had 86%. The UK had 76%. But interestingly, the United States was down at 48%. Now, I say that's interesting because the United States is a very different model of democracy, that basically all power is held at the bottom of the heap, and the states choose what powers to give back up to the top. But in terms of engagement, it doesn't seem to make any difference, although instinctively I feel that model is one I would personally be a little bit more comfortable. Yes, I will.
Minister.
Has the member considered the models of town hall democracy very common in New England and the levels of participation that affords, and perhaps will he be arranging another local government committee fact-finding trip?
I think some of the smaller communities, perhaps in the West Indies or the Indian Ocean, would be the appropriate place to go. But as I'm only a substitute member of the committee, I shall be left guarding the gates back here. Now, we talk about, turnout going down. Well, it's actually quite interesting that if we look at the 1945 general election, at those who could vote, the turnout was 70.05%, and in 1997 it was almost identical at 69.39%. So what motivates people to vote is something perhaps quite subtle, and I think the high turnout that we've just had in the referendum may be because people felt they could change the system, which they wanted to do, rather than simply change the faces, which they were perhaps less interested in doing. Now, I've got some useful proposals, perhaps, that I know the committee hasn't considered, that might, for local elections in particular, we talked about randomising the order of people on the ballot paper. No. There's a much easier way of doing it. Have circular ballot papers, so that you just turn it round until, so nobody's at the top and nobody's at the bottom. And that would work. Now, it's comparatively recent, certainly since I first voted, we didn't used to have the party designation or description on the ballot paper. And I wonder if, in local elections in particular, it would be helpful if you actually only voted for people you actually knew, free from any influence of party. I say that as a member of a party for 53 years. Now, finally, presiding officer, one of the things the committee does deal with, which I just will close on, the issue of postcode lottery. I'm actually in favour of variability in delivery, meeting core requirements, but not expecting every community to do the same things. We need strong messages that reinforce that throughout Scotland if we want people to be engaged.